This is episode 8 of the Creator-God theory of the Atonement. In this episode, we introduce the solution to the atonement crisis. It can be expressed in one simple, memorable equation: my circus, my monkeys, my problem. With this equation, we cross a threshold, the turning point of the entire Creator-God theory of the Atonement. Before we move forward, let's step back for a moment and see where we are in the larger investigation. When this series began, I presented the Atonement as an investigation unfolding in 3 parts, each building on the last. In part 1, the problem, our goal was to identify the contradictions and paradoxes surrounding the Atonement and to ask the central question: we know the Atonement works, but how? In part 2, the solution, we turned to the Creator-God theory itself, the framework that shows how the Atonement works, by revealing that the Creator stands accountable for His creations. Finally, in part 3, the outcome. We'll examine where every theory of the Atonement ultimately leads into one of 2 theological outcomes: the theology of the cross or the theology of glory. That is the investigation before us: the problem, the solution, and the outcome. And now we enter part 2, the solution. This is where the search for how the Atonement works finally takes shape. Everything we uncovered in part 1, every question, every paradox, every violation of justice or reason, now finds its answer here, in what we call the Creator-God theory of the Atonement. This isn't just another theory among many. It's the only one that stands the test of our reality-based checklist, passing every criterion tied to both the vicarious nature of the Atonement and its infinite nature. In short, it violates neither the moral laws that govern justice, nor the causal laws that govern reality. Now, that doesn't prove the theory is true, but it does mean it survives the falsification test. It remains the only potentially legitimate theory still standing, while every other major theory has already fallen short. From this point on, our task changes. We move from exposing contradictions to building coherence. Coherence strong enough to explain why this theory passes every test on this checklist. And the work of building that coherence begins right now. To build coherence, we need to pause for a necessary warning. We're about to expose 2 long-standing distortions, one rooted in the fall of man, as traditionally applied to damnation, and the other in the atonement of Christ, as traditionally applied to salvation. Each distorts the divine-human relationship in opposite directions, through the disproportionate assignment of blame in the fall of man and the disproportionate assignment of credit in the atonement of Christ. Let me explain. In the fall of man, traditional theology assigns 0 responsibility to God and 100% of the blame to man. The fall points to separation from God, but when that separation is placed entirely on man's shoulders, the story becomes a one-sided condemnation, with man damned and God completely exonerated. In doing so, God is effectively distanced from any responsibility or accountability for His role in creating the earth and preparing the Garden of Eden as the backdrop for the fall, while man is cursed and condemned for his part in the very same divine drama of creation, fall, and atonement. In the atonement of Christ, traditional theology assigns 0 participation or merit to man and 100% of the credit to God, to Christ, the Son of God. The atonement points to reconciliation with God, but when that reconciliation rests entirely on divine grace, the story becomes one-sided once again. Christ all-sufficient and man completely passive, helpless, and incapable of contributing to his own salvation. In doing so, man is effectively stripped of agency, accountability, and partnership in the redemptive process, while Christ alone is declared both necessary and sufficient for salvation. The atonement, then, is reduced to a divine act, performed for man rather than with him, a story that leaves man a passive recipient instead of a participating partner in the process of redemption. From these 2 long-standing distortions arose 2 false doctrines that have shaped much of traditional Christianity: original sin, wherein man is damned no matter what, and grace alone, wherein man is saved no matter what. The first separates God from man in the act of the fall, and the second separates God from man in the act of salvation. In both, the divine-human partnership is broken, the fall without divine participation, and the atonement without human participation. Together they destroy the coherence of the plan, leaving God and man divided in both blame and credit, and no longer united in the participatory work that spans all three phases of the plan of salvation: creation, fall, and atonement. And now, here's another breakthrough in our gospel understanding of the participatory nature of the plan of salvation. For centuries, theology has wrestled with this long-standing conundrum. How can justice and mercy coexist without mercy robbing justice, or justice denying mercy? It's the question that has haunted every theory of the atonement and still stands unresolved. But the solution lies in the participatory nature of salvation itself. Only when both God and man act together, through the union of grace and works, can justice and mercy exist in perfect harmony. Let's break that down. First, Christ's atoning sacrifice provides the grace that makes mercy possible. Second, man's responsive works satisfy justice's demand for accountability, restitution, and real change. And third, justice and mercy meet only through the union of grace and works. But here's the catch. Neither grace nor works can do it alone. God alone, meaning grace alone, can't do it. Man alone, meaning works alone, can't do it. But God and man together, meaning grace and works united, can do it. And that's the breakthrough. The participatory nature of salvation, God and man, grace and works united, restores coherence to the entire plan of salvation and finally resolves the long-standing conundrum of how to harmonize justice and mercy. Now, before we move forward, some might wonder how the percentages of blame and credit should be divided. But the Creator-God theory doesn't divide blame and credit as traditional Christianity does. It restores their balance, holding both God and man accountable within their respective roles. Let's start with the fall, the question of blame. Each side bears full accountability within its own domain. God takes full accountability for his role as the creator, for bringing his creations into being and standing behind the consequences of that creation. Man takes full accountability for his role as a moral agent, for his choices, his actions, and the outcomes they produce. It's not about shared blame. It's about full transparency and restored accountability, both divine and human. Now, turning to the atonement, the question of merit. Each side receives full merit within its own role. Christ receives full merit for his role as the Redeemer, for making reconciliation and grace possible. Man receives full merit for his role as a disciple, for responding to that grace through faith, works, and obedience to divine law. It's not about shared credit, it's about full disclosure and shared merit, divine and human, united in coherence. To see how this divine balance actually works in practice, let's step out of theology for a moment and look at something familiar, a program built on the same participatory principle that unites grace and works in harmony, which I've titled the Scouting Program Analogy, with the summary subtitle, Free Access to It, Earned Advancement Within It. To illustrate this analogy, let's look at these two programs side by side, the Scouting Program and the Gospel Program. First, both programs are freely accessible. In the Scouting Program, anyone can join. Entry is open to all. No merit badge required, no works required to qualify. In that sense, access is by grace alone. The same is true in the Gospel Program. It too is freely accessible. Anyone can enter. Entry is granted to all. No one earns the right to receive it. In that sense, access is by grace alone. Second, once inside the program, the pattern changes. The Scouting Program provides the opportunity for growth, to learn skills, build character, and develop leadership. But the scout must provide the effort. There are no free rides. True progress requires participation. Likewise, in the Gospel Program, the Lord provides the opportunity for spiritual growth through his plan, commandments, covenants, and grace that enables progress. But the disciple must provide the effort. There is no free grace. Eternal progress requires participation. Third, advancement within both programs requires effort and must be earned. In scouting, advancement comes by meeting requirements, completing projects, and demonstrating mastery. In short, it must be earned. And in this sense, you must work out your own salvation or advancement. In the gospel, the same principle applies at a higher level. Spiritual advancement requires effort, obedience, and growth. In short, it must be earned. As Paul wrote, you must work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. Fourth, and this is key, a scout cannot earn the rank of eagle outside the scouting program. No matter how good his intentions, the rank belongs to the program itself. But within the program, a scout can earn that rank through diligence, obedience, and perseverance. And the same is true of the gospel. A disciple cannot earn salvation or exaltation outside the gospel program. No matter how moral or sincere, salvation belongs to the system God established. But within that program, a disciple can progress toward salvation through faith, obedience, and what we might call works of righteousness within the program, not apart from it. So when Paul teaches that salvation is by grace and not of works, he is speaking of access to the program, the free invitation extended to all. But when he says to work out your own salvation with fear and trembling, he is speaking of advancement within that program, the growth, effort, obedience, and faithful works required once grace has opened the door. The confusion only arises when we lose sight of the context, when we treat access and advancement as if they were the same. Once the pattern is clear, grace and works no longer conflict. They complete each other. Free access to it, earned advancement within it, two parts of one participatory gospel program of grace and works. And that word, participatory, is the key. Because every true law of growth is participatory by nature, it requires engagement, contribution, and accountability from all who benefit from it. Grace participates by granting access. Faith participates by responding. Works participate by fulfilling divine law. In the gospel, participation isn't optional. It's the very framework through which grace and works harmonize to reconcile justice and mercy. Now let's extend that same participatory principle to the Creator-God theory of the atonement, because traditional theories have portrayed God as a deeply offended deity, holding man fully accountable for the fall, while totally exonerating him from any responsibility for the consequences of his own creations, even after setting the stage for that very outcome. The Creator-God theory changes that. It restores coherence by showing that God himself participates fully in the story he created, not as an exonerated judge standing apart, but as a responsible creator who takes full accountability for his creations. Or, as we've come to summarize it, my circus, my monkeys, my problem. If my circus, my monkeys, my problem sums up God's participatory role in creation and the fall, then it must also govern how we understand the atonement. Because if God truly takes responsibility for his creations, then the atonement cannot be viewed as a detached act of appeasement by an offended deity, but as the Creator's own redemptive act within the moral framework he himself established. And once we see it that way, two long-standing questions rise to the surface, questions that every Christian theory of the atonement has struggled to answer. How can it be just for the innocent to suffer for the guilty? And how can a single finite act carry infinite consequence without breaking the laws of reality? These are the twin contradictions that have made the atonement appear both unjust and incoherent. We'll call them the two halves of the atonement crisis. The injustice accusation. Its vicarious nature appears to violate the foundational principles of justice. And the incoherence problem. Its infinite nature appears to violate the eternal laws of identity and causality. The Creator-God theory resolves both, what we'll call the two halves of the atonement solution. First, through the divine accountability principle, which restores moral justice, for it is not unjust to hold the Creator God accountable for his creations. And second, through the divine potentiality principle, which restores logical coherence, for it is not incoherent for the Creator God's redemptive power to be potentially rather than actually infinite. Two problems, two solutions, one coherent theory of the atonement. Hence, my circus, my monkeys, my problem. Let's step back for a moment and see the whole picture. For centuries, every theory of the atonement has been held together by a long chain of divine logic, linking the how of the atonement with justice, mercy, grace, and for some, even works. But two links in that chain have always been weak, sometimes even broken. The vicarious link, which appears unjust because it seems to violate the principles of justice by punishing the innocent in place of the guilty, and the infinite link, which appears incoherent because it seems to violate reality itself. The Creator-God theory restores both broken links. It repairs the vicarious link by restoring justice through divine accountability, showing that it is not unjust for the Creator to bear responsibility for his creations. And it repairs the infinite link by restoring coherence through divine potentiality, showing that the Creator's redemptive reach is potentially, not actually, infinite within a finite world, yet always sufficient for every being within his creations. With those two links restored, the chain holds once more. Justice and mercy stand reconciled through the union of grace and works, and all realities connect again in one just, incoherent atonement. Having shown how the Creator-God theory of the atonement restores both broken links, its vicarious and infinite natures, we're left with the ultimate question. If every creature is responsible and accountable for their actions, then what of creation itself? Who bears responsibility for the world that needs redeeming? In our next episode, we turn to that question and to the forgotten principle that unlocks it, taking full and complete ownership and the forgotten law of corporate accountability. There, we'll see that understanding how the atonement truly works begins when the Creator God himself takes full and complete ownership of all his creations, our first real step toward the solution to the atonement crisis.